Texas, June 15th, 1943. 6 o'clock in the morning. A German prisoner of war sat at a wooden table in the mess hall 50 miles outside Houston. His hands trembled as he stared at the metal tray before him. On that tray sat 3 strips of bacon still glistening with grease, 2 eggs scrambled yellow with real butter, 2 pieces of toast, the butter melting into golden pools, and a cup of coffee, black and hot steam rising in the early morning air. Carl Friedman was 19 years old. He had been a soldier in the Wehrmacht for 2 years. He had fought in North Africa under Rommel. He had believed every word that Goebbels told him about America, that it was weak, that it was dying, that its people were soft and its soldiers were cowards. But now he was crying. Not because of hunger, though he had been hungry many times. Not because of homesickness, though Munich felt impossibly far away. He was crying because, in 4 years of serving Hitler's army, eating scraps and stale bread and watery soup, he had never seen anything like this. And the American sergeant who had placed this tray in front of him, this Mexican man with kind eyes and calloused hands, had said something that broke through every lie Carl had ever been told. This is what we feed prisoners. You should see what free men eat. Carl understood enough English to catch the meaning. He closed his eyes. The first tear fell, then another. Around him, 4,999 other German prisoners faced the same impossible reality, the same breakfast, the same cognitive dissonance, the same shattering of everything they thought they knew. Some refused to eat, certain it was poison, or some elaborate psychological trap. Others ate mechanically, too stunned to process what was happening. But most, like Carl, simply broke down. Strong men, soldiers, warriors of the Third Reich, reduced to tears by bacon and eggs. This is the story of how America won a war, not with bullets, but with breakfast. How kindness proved more powerful than propaganda, and how a young Nazi named Carl Friedman learned that everything he had been taught was a lie. The morning sun climbed higher over the flat Texas landscape. Inside Camp Hearn, the largest prisoner of war facility in the state history was being made. Not with speeches or battles, but with butter and coffee and the simple revolutionary act of treating enemies like human beings. Carl Friedman had arrived in Texas 6 weeks earlier, but his journey had begun much further back. Munich, 1936. A 12-year-old boy joins the Hitler Youth. His father died in the First War, the one they called the Great War, the war to end all wars. His mother works in a factory, her hands raw and bleeding, trying to feed 3 sons on wages that buy less each month. Young Carl wears his brown uniform with pride. The older boys tell him stories about German greatness, about the fatherland's destiny, about the enemies who want to destroy them. The Jews, they say, the communists, the weak democracies of the West. America, they tell him, is the worst of all. A mongrel nation, no pure blood, no strong leader, just chaos and poverty, and the walking corpses of capitalism. During the Depression, they show him photographs, bread lines, homeless camps, desperation. See, they say this is what democracy brings. This is what happens when you reject strong leadership. Carl believes them. Why wouldn't he? Everyone he knows believes. His teachers, his youth leaders, the radio, the newspapers, the rallies where hundreds of thousands raise their arms in perfect unison. This cannot all be wrong, he thinks. So many people cannot be deceived. 1941. Carl turns 17. The war is going magnificently. France has fallen. England is on its knees. The Soviet Union is collapsing under the brilliance of German military might. Carl volunteers for the Wehrmacht. His mother cries but does not stop him. His brothers Peter and Franz look at him with envy and pride. He trains. He learns to march, to shoot, to follow orders without question. His commanders tell him that German soldiers are the finest in the world, that they fight with honor and precision, that the enemy forces, especially the Americans who have just entered the war, are soft and unprepared. When America declares war after Pearl Harbor, the officers laugh. The Americans, they say, cannot even defend their own harbor. They will crumble when they face true German soldiers. Carl believes this too. 1942, North Africa. Carl sees his first combat. The heat is unbearable. The sand gets into everything. The British are tougher than expected, but the Afrika Korps is winning. Rommel is a genius. Victory is certain. Then the Americans arrive. November 19th, 42, Operation Torch. American forces land in Morocco and Algeria. Carl's unit receives orders to engage. The officers seem less confident now, but they maintain the propaganda. These Americans have never seen real war. They will break easily. The first time Carl sees American soldiers, they are advancing across a ridge near Kasserine Pass. They move with surprising coordination. Their equipment looks new, abundant. When they open fire, the volume is shocking. So many guns, so much ammunition. The Americans fight with a ferocity that the propaganda never mentioned. But Germany is still strong. Carl's unit holds. Months pass. The fighting intensifies. May 10th, 1943. Tunisia. Carl's unit is surrounded. They have been fighting for 14 hours. Ammunition is running low. Water is gone. The sun beats down mercilessly. American artillery pounds their position with methodical precision. An American voice calls out in broken German, "Surrender. No harm will come. Geneva Convention will be honored." Carl's commander, a hardened captain from Prussia, makes the calculation. They can fight and die, or surrender and live. He chooses life. 187 men lay down their weapons. Carl is among them. As American soldiers approach, Carl expects the worst. Execution, perhaps. Torture, certainly. This is what happens to prisoners of war. Everyone knows this, but the Americans give them water. Real water cold from canteens. They provide medical care for the wounded. They are professional, even respectful. One American sergeant, a tall man from somewhere called Oklahoma, speaks a bit of German. He tells them, "War is over for you boys. Time to go home." Except home is still at war. So first a different journey, from Tunisia to a temporary camp in Casablanca, then by ship to Gibraltar. Carl has never been on a ship before. He is sick for days. The Americans provide medicine. The food is basic but adequate. Better than what he ate in the Africa Corps. Then the Atlantic crossing, 2 weeks on a transport ship with hundreds of other prisoners. Carl expects cramped conditions, minimal food brutality. Instead, there are bunks, meals twice daily, no beatings. Some of the older prisoners, men who fought in the First War, shake their heads in confusion. "This is not how prisoners should be treated," they mutter. There must be a reason. They land at Norfolk, Virginia, Carl's first glimpse of America. The port is enormous. Ships everywhere, cranes loading and unloading, workers moving with efficient purpose. Everything looks new, maintained, abundant. This does not look like a country on the verge of collapse. A train carries them west. Carl presses his face to the window, watching America scroll past. Cities that have not been bombed, farmland stretching to horizons, cars on roads, people who look well-fed, well-dressed, children playing. The propaganda said America was dying, but this looks very much alive. 3 days on the train, through Virginia, Tennessee, Arkansas, Louisiana, finally Texas. The landscape flattens. The heat intensifies. On June 14th, 1943, the train stops at a small station. A sign reads, "Herne." Guards march them off the train. The sun is blinding. The temperature must be close to 100 degrees. Carl has never felt heat like this. North Africa was hot, but this is different. This heat is wet, oppressive, suffocating. Trucks carry them to the camp. Camp Herne, barbed wire fences, guard towers, barracks arranged in neat rows. Carl feels a strange relief. This looks like a prison. This makes sense. They are processed. Medical examinations. Delousing. New clothes American made. Clean. Carl cannot remember the last time he wore clean clothes. A sergeant assigns them to barracks. Carl finds himself in Building 17, Section C, 24 men to a room. He expects chaos, filth, desperation. Instead, there are actual beds. Not cots on bare ground, but beds with frames and mattresses. Thin mattresses, yes, but mattresses nonetheless. Clean sheets, pillows, small lockers for personal items. Carl sits on his assigned bed and tries to understand. His bunkmate, a man named Otto Becker, from somewhere in Bavaria, sits across from him. Otto is older, maybe 24, with tired eyes and farmer's hands. "This is strange," Otto says in German. Carl nods. "I expected worse," Otto continues. "Everyone expected worse," Carl replies. They sit in silence as evening falls. Through the window, Carl can see American guards changing shifts. They are casual, relaxed. One is smoking a cigarette, another is laughing at something. They do not look like brutal captors. They look like ordinary men doing a job. That night, Carl lies awake. The barracks are quiet except for the sounds of men breathing, shifting, occasionally coughing. He thinks about his mother, his brothers, Munich. He wonders if Allied bombers have reached the city yet. He prays his family is safe. He also thinks about the train ride, about the American landscape he saw through the window, about the abundance that contradicts everything Goebbels said. A small seed of doubt takes root in his mind, but he is too tired to examine it. Tomorrow there will be work assignments. Tomorrow the real nature of this captivity will reveal itself. Tomorrow he will understand what the Americans really want. He does not know that tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock everything he believes will shatter like glass. Somewhere in the camp, in the officers' quarters, Captain James Sullivan sits at a desk, writing a letter to his wife in Dallas. Sullivan is 35 years old, a rancher before the war, a veteran of the First War when he was barely more than a boy. He has seen what hatred does. He has seen what cruelty produces. He believes there is a better way. Earlier that day, he had an argument with the camp commander, Colonel Harrison. Sullivan requested permission to implement a new feeding program. Not the bare minimum required by the Geneva Convention, but something more. Something that might actually change hearts and minds. Colonel Harrison resisted. Why feed Nazis like kings when American boys are fighting overseas? Sullivan made his case. These prisoners will go home eventually. They will tell stories. Would America prefer those stories to be about cruelty or kindness, about starvation or abundance, about American weakness or American strength? Reluctantly, Harrison agreed. 1 week trial. Breakfast only. Sullivan finishes his letter. He seals the envelope. Then he walks across the compound to the mess hall. Sergeant Miguel Torres is still there, even at this late hour, planning tomorrow's breakfast. Torres is 28, Mexican-American from San Antonio. His father was a vaquero, a cowboy. His mother baked bread that won prizes at county fairs. Torres knows food. More importantly, he knows what food can communicate. Miguel, Sullivan says. Torres turns, wipes his hands on his apron. Captain, tomorrow morning, Sullivan says, I need you to cook American. Real American. The best damn breakfast these men have ever seen. Torres grins. His eyes light up. He understands immediately what Sullivan is asking. You want to blow their minds, sir? I want to blow their whole worldview, Sergeant. Torres nods slowly. Bacon. 3 strips per man. Eggs under 2 per man, scrambled or fried their choice. Toast, real butter. Coffee, real coffee. None of that ersatz garbage they're used to. Torres does quick math in his head. 5,000 prisoners, 15,000 strips of bacon, 10,000 eggs, pounds and pounds of butter, gallons and gallons of coffee. That's expensive, sir. I know. Colonel approved this. He did. Well, Torres whistles low. Then he extends his hand. Sullivan shakes it. They won't know what hit them, Torres says. That's the idea. Sullivan leaves. Torres begins pulling supplies. Bacon from the cold storage, crates of eggs, flour for fresh bread, coffee beans the good ones, not the cheap stuff. His crew will arrive at 4 in the morning to begin cooking. They will have 2 hours to prepare 5,000 breakfasts. It will be the hardest morning of their lives. But Torres has a vision. He imagines the faces of those German soldiers when they see real food, when they taste butter and bacon and fresh eggs, when they realize that the enemy they were told to hate is feeding them better than their own army ever did. He works until midnight preparing planning. Then he goes to his quarters and sleeps for 3 hours. At 3:45 in the morning, his alarm clock rings. Torres rises. He dresses. He walks through the still dark camp to the mess hall. His crew is already there. Jose Miguel's cousin, Roberto, who worked in his uncle's restaurant in Houston, Carlos, who learned to cook in his mother's kitchen in Corpus Christi, and Tomas, the youngest, barely 18, who joined the army to escape poverty. They do not speak much. They work. Bacon hits the griddles. The smell begins to fill the mess hall. Sweet, smoky, rich. Fat sizzles and pops. Torres moves from station to station, checking, adjusting, encouraging. Eggs crack into enormous bowls. Butter melts into scrambled mixtures. Bread goes into ovens. Coffee begins to brew, filling the air with dark, complex aroma. By 5:30, they are ready, plates lined up, serving stations prepared, everything hot and fresh and perfect. Torres stands back and surveys his work. This is more than breakfast. This is a statement. This is America saying we are strong enough to be generous. We are confident enough to treat enemies with dignity. At 5:45, the wake-up bell rings across the camp. In Building 17, Section C, Carl Friedman opens his eyes. For a moment, he forgets where he is. Then reality returns. Texas, prison camp, enemy territory. Around him, men stir. Otto yawns. Someone coughs. The morning routine begins. They dress in the clothes provided, American-made shirts and pants. They use the latrines, wash their faces with real soap, real water. Everything is clean. Everything works. It is surreal. At 5:55, a whistle blows. Formation time. The prisoners gather in the yard. The air is already warm. The sun is just breaking the horizon. A sergeant, not Torres, addresses them in broken German. Breakfast at 0600, mess hall. Line up orderly, no pushing. That is all. No threats, no warnings, just information. The prisoners exchange glances. Some are suspicious. Hans Weber, a hardcore Nazi in his 30s, mutters about tricks and traps. But most are simply hungry and curious. At 6 o'clock, precisely, the mess hall doors open. 5,000 men begin to file inside. Carl is in the middle of the line. He shuffles forward slowly. The smell reaches him first. His stomach clenches. That smell, meat, real meat, cooking, and something else. Butter coffee. It cannot be. He reaches the serving line. An American soldier, young maybe his own age, hands him a tray. Carl takes it. His hands are shaking slightly. He moves down the line. The first server, Jose, uses tongs to place 3 strips of bacon on the tray. The bacon is perfect. Golden brown, crispy at the edges, glistening with fat. Carl stares. This must be a mistake. 3 strips for a prisoner. The next server adds eggs. Real eggs. Scrambled, yellow, fluffy, steam rising. The next adds toast. 2 thick slices, butter melting into the bread. The last server, Sergeant Torres himself, pours coffee into a cup. Dark, hot, real. Torres looks at Carl. Their eyes meet. Torres smiles slightly. Eat up, amigo. Plenty more where that came from. Carl does not understand the words, but he understands the tone. This is real. This is for you. This is not a trick. Carl carries his tray to a table. He sits. He sets the tray down carefully as if it might disappear if handled roughly. Around him, the mess hall fills with men and trays and the overwhelming smell of American breakfast. Some men stand frozen, holding their trays, unable to believe. Others sit and stare. A few eat immediately, ravenously. Hans Weber, the Nazi hardliner, throws his tray to the ground. The bacon and eggs scatter across the floor. Poison, he shouts in German. They are trying to poison us, to weaken us. Do not eat. But most ignore him. Hunger and curiosity override propaganda. Carl picks up a strip of bacon. He brings it close to his face. The smell is overwhelming. He has not eaten meat like this in years. Even before the war, during the Depression and rationing, meat was scarce. This bacon is thick, perfectly cooked, unimaginably luxurious. He takes a bite. The flavor explodes across his tongue. Salt, fat, smoke, richness beyond description. His eyes close involuntarily. He chews slowly, trying to make it last. It is the most delicious thing he has ever tasted. He takes another bite, then another. The bacon has gone too quickly. He moves to the eggs. Scrambled with butter. He scoops a forkful. Soft, creamy. The butter adds a richness that makes his throat tighten with unexpected emotion. Otto, sitting across from him, eats with tears streaming down his face. He makes no sound. He simply eats and cries. Carl understands. He feels the same emotion building in his chest. He eats the toast. The butter has soaked into the bread. It is still warm from the oven. He drinks the coffee. Real coffee, probably. Not the acorn ersatz they gave Wehrmacht soldiers. Real coffee, dark and strong and bitter in the best way. And then he cannot hold it back anymore. The tears come. Carl Friedman, 19 years old believer in the Third Reich soldier of the Wehrmacht, sits in a Texas mess hall and cries into his empty plate. Not from sadness, not from fear, but from the complete and total collapse of everything he thought he knew about the world. If America can feed its prisoners like this, what does it feed its free men? If this is how the enemy treats captives, how do they treat friends? If a supposedly dying nation can afford bacon and eggs and real coffee for 5,000 prisoners, how strong must it actually be? Every piece of propaganda, every speech, every lesson from the Hitler Youth, every certainty Carl built his worldview upon shatters in this moment. He was told America was weak. This is not weakness. He was told America was dying. This is not death. He was told Americans were enemies. But enemies do not feed you like this. Across the mess hall, Captain Sullivan stands in the shadows near the entrance watching. He sees the tears. He sees the shock. He sees men who came in as Nazis beginning the first steps toward becoming something else. Next to him, Colonel Harrison watches too. His expression is unreadable. "Expensive breakfast, Captain," Harrison says quietly. "Yes, sir," Sullivan replies. "Worth it." Sullivan watches as Carl Friedman wipes his eyes with the back of his hand, then picks up his coffee cup and drinks the last swallow. "Yes, sir," Sullivan says. "I believe it is." In homes across America, families are sitting down to similar breakfasts. In diners and restaurants, similar meals are being served. This abundance that seems miraculous to Carl is ordinary to Americans. Normal. Expected. And that is precisely the point. This is not special treatment. This is not reward. This is simply how America operates, even in war, even for enemies. The breakfast ends. Prisoners file out, most in stunned silence. They return to their barracks to await work assignments. In Building 17, Section C, Carl sits on his bed. His stomach is full for the first time in months, maybe years. Otto sits across from him, smoking a cigarette provided by the camp. "That happened," Otto says. Carl nods. "Real bacon?" "Yes." "Real eggs?" "Yes." "Real coffee?" "Yes." Otto exhales smoke. "My head hurts." Carl understands. The cognitive dissonance is painful, almost physical. Everything you believed, everything you were certain was true, revealed as lies. It makes your head hurt. It makes your heart hurt. "What do we do now?" Otto asks. Carl does not have an answer. He lies back on his bed and stares at the ceiling. Outside, the Texas sun climbs higher into a cloudless sky. The heat builds. The day begins. And Carl Friedman starts the long, difficult, necessary journey from Nazi soldier to free man. All because of breakfast. The days after that first breakfast moved like a fever dream. Carl Friedman tried to reconcile the evidence before his eyes with the certainties planted in his mind since childhood. The reconciliation was impossible. Something had to break. Either reality was lying or everything he had been taught was false. Reality he was beginning to understand did not lie. Every morning at 6 o'clock, the same breakfast arrived. 3 strips of bacon, 2 eggs, toast with butter, real coffee. 5,000 men filed through the mess hall, and 5,000 men emerged changed. Not all at once, not dramatically, but gradually, inevitably, the armor of propaganda cracked. By the third day, Hans Weber was eating. He tried to hide it, sitting in a far corner, turning his back to the room. But Carl saw him. Everyone saw him. The last of the hardline believers undone by hunger and bacon. No one said anything. There was nothing to say. They all understood. Ideology was no match for an empty stomach and the smell of American breakfast. But the food was only the beginning. On the 4th day, June 18th, work assignments began. The Geneva Convention allowed prisoner labor, provided it was paid and voluntary. Paid. The word itself seemed absurd. Carl and his fellow prisoners would work on local farms and receive 80 cents per day in camp scrip. Money they could use to buy cigarettes, candy toiletries, small luxuries. The Germans who ran the concentration camps did not pay their prisoners. The Germans who ran labor battalions did not pay their workers. But here in enemy America, in the heart of Texas, prisoners would be paid for their labor. Another crack in the armor. Carl was assigned to a place called the Johnson Farm, 15 miles from camp. 40 prisoners would go each day, transported by truck, supervised by guards. The work would be cotton picking. Hard labor in brutal heat, but paid labor. Honest labor. The trucks arrived at 7 in the morning. American soldiers with rifles stood watch, but their posture was relaxed, almost bored. This was not the rigid, threatening presence of SS guards. These men looked like they would rather be anywhere else doing anything else but had a job to do and would do it without cruelty. Carl climbed into the truck bed with 39 other men. Otto was among them. The truck rumbled to life and pulled out of the camp gates. For 20 minutes, they drove through Texas countryside. Flat lands stretching to horizons. Cotton fields green and growing. Farmhouses with porches and dogs. Barns painted red. Everything looked maintained, prosperous, alive. Otto leaned close to Carl. This does not look like a country losing a war. Carl nodded. No, it did not. The truck turned onto a dirt road and stopped before a white farmhouse. A sign by the mailbox read Johnson. A man stood waiting in the yard, tall and lean, maybe 60 years old, wearing denim and a straw hat. This was Earl Johnson, though Carl did not know his name yet. The prisoners climbed down from the truck. An American sergeant, the same one who supervised transport, spoke through an interpreter. This is Mr. Johnson. His farm. You will pick cotton. You will work hard. He will treat you fair. Slack off, you go back to camp. Cause trouble. The sergeant paused, let the interpreter catch up. There will not be trouble for long. Understood? The prisoners nodded. Earl Johnson stepped forward. He looked each man in the eyes one by one. Not with hatred, not with contempt, with assessment, the way a rancher might assess cattle or horses, judging capability, strength, willingness. When his eyes reached Carl, they paused. Something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, not of identity, but of humanity. This old farmer seeing the young soldier. This young soldier seeing the old farmer. Two men on opposite sides of a war brought together by cotton and circumstance. Earl nodded slightly. Carl nodded back. Then Earl spoke. The interpreter translated. My wife will bring water and food at midday. Work hard until then. Stay in your assigned rows. No wandering. We clear. Clear. Crystal clear. The prisoners were given canvas sacks and shown to the cotton fields. The plants stood about waist-high bowls, opening white and fluffy in the morning sun. Carl had never picked cotton before. He watched the others copy their movements. Grasp the bowl. Pull. Try not to get stabbed by the sharp bits. Drop cotton in sack. Move to next plant. Repeat. The work was monotonous and painful. The sun climbed higher. The temperature rose past 90, then 100 degrees. Sweat soaked through Carl's shirt within the first hour. His hands began to bleed from the sharp edges of the bowls and branches. But he kept working. Around him, other prisoners did the same. Some complained quietly in German. Others worked in grim silence. A few of the farmers, among them like Otto, worked with practiced efficiency. Carl found rhythm in the repetition. Pull, drop, move. Pull, drop, move. His mind wandered. He thought about his mother in Munich. Was she safe? Had the bombs reached their neighborhood yet? He thought about his brothers. Peter probably on the Eastern Front by now. Franz too young still, but not for long. How many more years before they took 15-year-old boys? He thought about the bacon he had eaten that morning, about the impossible abundance of it, about Sergeant Torres smiling as he poured coffee, about Captain Sullivan watching from the shadows. He thought about propaganda films showing American breadlines during the Depression, about speeches describing American weakness and decadence, about the confident predictions that America would collapse under pressure. None of it was true. None of it had ever been true. At noon, a bell rang. Earl Johnson called out something. The interpreter shouted, "Lunch break 1 hour." The prisoners gathered in the shade of a large oak tree near the farmhouse. They collapsed onto the grass exhausted, grateful for rest. Then something extraordinary happened. A woman emerged from the farmhouse. She was older, maybe 55, with gray hair pulled back and kind eyes. She carried a large metal barrel, struggling slightly with the weight. Earl rushed to help her. Together they set it down near the oak tree. The woman removed the lid. Inside, ice water, actual ice floating in clear water. In Texas, in summer, in the middle of a war. She gestured to the prisoners. "Help yourselves, boys." The interpreter translated. For a moment, no one moved. This had to be a test, a trap, something. But thirst won. One prisoner stepped forward, dipped a cup into the barrel, drank deeply. His eyes widened. He dipped again. Others followed. Soon all 40 men were drinking ice-cold water under a Texas oak tree, unable to believe their fortune. But the woman, Martha Johnson, was not finished. She returned to the house and came back with a basket, inside cookies, homemade cookies, oatmeal raisins still slightly warm. She offered the basket to the nearest prisoner. He took one hesitantly. She smiled. Go on, take two. Y'all are working hard in this heat. The interpreter translated. Silence. Complete, absolute silence. Then quietly in German, someone said, Thank you, ma'am. Martha did not understand the words, but she understood the tone. You are welcome, honey. Carl took a cookie. He bit into it. Sweet, buttery, raisins plump and chewy. It tasted like childhood, like safety, like home. He looked at Martha Johnson. This woman, this enemy, this American smiling at him with genuine warmth, calling him honey, giving him cookies. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. Otto sat next to Carl, eating his cookies, slowly savoring each bite. My grandmother made cookies like this, he said quietly. Carl nodded. He could not speak. His throat was too tight. After the break, they returned to work. But something had shifted. The labor felt different. Not like forced work under guard, but like actual employment. Like they were hired hands, not slaves. Like their effort mattered and would be compensated and appreciated. At 5 o'clock, the workday ended. The prisoners loaded back into the trucks. As Carl climbed aboard, Earl Johnson approached. He looked at Carl's bleeding hands. He shook his head. He said something to the sergeant. The sergeant nodded, disappeared into the farmhouse, returned with a small tin. Mr. Johnson says to use this, the sergeant said, handing the tin to Carl. For your hands. Salve. Carl took the tin. He looked at Earl. Earl tipped his hat slightly. Carl nodded back. On the ride back to camp, Carl opened the tin. Inside, a pale ointment that smelled of herbs and wax. He rubbed it into his torn palms. The sting eased almost immediately. Otto watched. They give medicine to prisoners. Yes. They give cookies to prisoners. Yes. They pay prisoners to work. Yes. Otto leaned back against the truck bed. We are going to lose this war. Carl knew Otto was right, not because of weapons or strategy or battlefield tactics, but because you cannot defeat a people who have so much they can afford to be generous. You cannot defeat a nation so confident in its strength that it treats enemies with dignity. The armor cracked wider. That night in the barracks, the prisoners talked. Not loudly, not with excitement, but with the quiet, stunned tones of men whose worldview was collapsing. Someone mentioned the bacon. Someone else mentioned the cookies. A third man talked about the ice water, each small kindness, each moment of humanity adding to the weight of evidence. Hans Weber tried to rally resistance. This is psychological warfare, he insisted. They are softening us, breaking our will. When we return home, we must remember we are Germans. We are the master race. These Americans are mongrels, no matter how well they feed us. But his voice lacked conviction. Even he could hear the hollowness of his words. An older prisoner, a man named Friedrich, who had fought in the First War, spoke up. I was a prisoner then too, in France. They beat us, starved us, worked us until we collapsed. That was normal. That was what I expected here. He paused. This is not normal. This is something else, Worsperl. What? Someone asked. Friedrich considered. Strength, real strength. The kind that does not need to prove itself through cruelty. The barracks fell silent. Men lay in their bunks thinking. Carl stared at the ceiling. His hands, wrapped in bandages provided by the camp medical station, throbbed dully. The salve had helped, but the damage was done. Tomorrow would hurt, but tomorrow there would also be bacon and coffee and perhaps more cookies from Martha Johnson. Tomorrow he would return to the farm and pick more cotton. He would earn 80 cents. He would save that money, perhaps buy cigarettes to trade or keep it for something else he did not yet know what. Tomorrow, the armor would crack further. He thought about writing another letter home. What would he say? How could he explain this? Mother, the enemy feeds us better than our own army ever did. Mother, American farmers give us cookies. Mother, everything we were told was a lie. She would not believe it. How could she? He barely believed it himself, and he was living it. Sleep came slowly. When it finally arrived, Karl dreamed of Munich and bacon of his mother and ice water of Hitler's speeches and Martha Johnson's smile. The dreams made no sense. Nothing made sense anymore. But perhaps that was the point. Perhaps confusion was the first step toward clarity. 2 weeks passed. The routine solidified. Wake at dawn, breakfast at 6, truck to Johnson Farm at 7, work until 5, return to camp, dinner, evening free time, sleep, every day bacon and eggs, every day ice water and cookies, every day 80 cents added to camp accounts. Karl learned more English. The guards were patient teachers, happy to practice. He learned words for cotton water, hot tired thank you, basic vocabulary for basic needs. He learned that Earl Johnson had fought in the First War, that he had been wounded in France, that he returned home to Texas and swore he would never leave again, that he married Martha in 1920, that they had no children, just this farm and each other. He learned that Martha baked cookies every Sunday for church, that she considered it her Christian duty to feed the hungry even if the hungry were German soldiers, that she believed kindness was stronger than hatred. He learned that not all Americans agreed with this approach. Some locals wanted the prisoners treated harshly. Some wanted them gone entirely. But Earl and Martha stood firm. These were men, they said. Men deserve dignity. Karl also learned about America itself, from magazines left in the day room, from conversations with guards, from observation. He learned about something called the New Deal, about programs to help the poor during the Depression, about Social Security and labor unions and minimum wage, about a government that, however imperfectly, tried to care for its people. He learned about American diversity. Guards came from everywhere. New York, California, Mississippi, Oregon. Different accents, different backgrounds, different skin colors. Mexican Americans like Sergeant Torres. Italian Americans. Irish Americans. Polish Americans. All Americans. This was not racial purity. This was not Aryan supremacy. This was messy, complicated, gloriously mixed humanity. And somehow it worked. Somehow these diverse people united under one flag and functioned as one nation. The propaganda said diversity was weakness. But Karl was seeing something else. He was seeing strength through diversity. Different perspectives, different skills, different experiences, all contributing to a whole greater than its parts. The armor did not just crack, it shattered. On the 4th of July, 1943, everything changed again. The camp announced a special celebration, American Independence Day. The prisoners would be allowed to observe, though not participate. There would be activities, entertainment, special food, special food. Karl almost laughed. Every day was special food compared to Wehrmacht rations. But this, the guards promised, would be different. Morning came with the usual breakfast. But the atmosphere in camp was different. The American guards seemed excited, almost giddy. They wore red, white, and blue ribbons. Some had small flags pinned to their uniforms. After breakfast, the prisoners were led to a large open area near the mess hall. Bleachers had been set up, a baseball diamond marked out in the dirt. Baseball. Karl had heard of this game but never seen it. The guards explained through interpreters. 2 teams, hit ball with bat, run around bases, score points. It seemed absurd. Why hit a ball and run in a circle? What was the point? But then the game began. Guards against local civilians, men in casual clothes taking positions on the field. A pitcher throwing, a batter swinging, the crack of bat meeting ball, shouts and cheers. The crowd, Americans from nearby towns, eating hot dogs and drinking Coca-Cola. Laughing, celebrating. Karl watched fascinated, not by the game itself, which he did not understand, but by the people. Their joy, their freedom, their casual, unself-conscious happiness. These people were at war. Their sons and brothers and fathers were fighting overseas. Some were dying, yet here they were playing a game, eating hot dogs, celebrating their independence. Otto leaned over. They are happy. Karl nodded. Yes. While they are winning the war. Yes. We were never this happy, even when we were winning. The observation struck deep. It was true. Karl remembered the early victories. France, Poland, North Africa. The Wehrmacht celebrated, yes, but always with an edge of hardness, of grim satisfaction. Never this light, easy joy. Perhaps Carl thought you can only be truly happy when you fight for something worth fighting for. When you believe in what you are defending. The Germans fought for empire, for racial superiority, for conquest. The Americans fought for freedom, for democracy, for the right to play baseball on a summer afternoon. One was heavy, one was light, one was dark, one was filled with sunshine. At 2 o'clock, an announcement. Special dinner tonight, 6 o'clock. Something called a barbecue. The prisoners did not know what barbecue meant. They would learn. At 6, the mess hall had been transformed. Tables moved outside. Grills set up, smoke rising. The smell that filled the air made Carl's knees weak. Meat, roasting meat, but not just any meat. This was something profound, something slow-cooked and smoke-kissed and deeply fundamentally American. Sergeant Torres stood by the grills presiding over the operation like a high priest. He wore a different expression tonight, pride. This was his culture, his heritage, his gift to these men. The prisoners lined up. Carl's hands shook as he held his plate forward. The servers loaded his plate with wonders. Beef brisket, sliced thick, so tender it fell apart at the touch. Smoke ring visible in the meat, pink and perfect. Ribs, pork ribs glazed with sauce that gleamed in the evening light. Corn on the butter melting down the kernels, salt and pepper. Potato salad, creamy, tangy, coleslaw, cool, crisp. A slice of watermelon, red and sweet and cold. And for dessert, peach cobbler, warm, cinnamon-scented, with vanilla ice cream melting on top. Carl carried his plate to a table. He sat. He looked at the food before him. This was not a meal. This was a statement. This was America saying, look what we have. Look what we can do. Look what we share even with enemies. He picked up a rib. Sauce dripped down his fingers. He bit in. The meat pulled away from the bone effortlessly. The flavor was layers upon layers, sweet, smoky, savory, complex beyond description. He closed his eyes, chewed, swallowed. Then he reached for the brisket, fork tender, melting, perfect. The corn, the potato salad, the coleslaw, each element perfect. Each element contributing to an overwhelming whole. Around him, 4,999 other German prisoners experienced the same revelation. This was how Americans ate, not just on special occasions. This was normal. This was Sunday dinner across Texas. This was ordinary American abundance. And they had been told America was starving. Captain Sullivan stood at a microphone, an interpreter beside him. He spoke. Men, today we celebrate freedom. We know you are not free. You are prisoners, but you are also men. You fought for your country same as us. Tonight we share our table, not as captors and prisoners, as men. Pause for translation. This food, this is normal for Americans, not special, not just for holidays. This is how we eat. Farms across Texas cook like this every Sunday. Pause. You have been told America is weak, starving, defeated. Look around. Does this look defeated? Pause. We feed our prisoners better than your officers fed you on the front lines. Not because we are soft, because we are strong. Strong enough to be generous. Pause. When you go home, and you will go home, remember this. Remember that America did not have to treat you this way, but we chose to, because that is who we are. The speech ended, silence followed. Then slowly the prisoners returned to eating. But something fundamental had shifted. Carl felt it happening inside himself, a transformation he could not stop and did not want to. Every certainty he had held was gone. Every belief he had carried into this camp had been disproven. Not through argument or propaganda or force, but through kindness, through bacon and ice water and cookies, through barbecue and baseball and the simple revolutionary act of treating enemies like human beings. He was not a Nazi anymore. He did not know when exactly it happened. Perhaps at that first breakfast, perhaps during Martha Johnson's smile, perhaps right now eating peach cobbler under a Texas sky. But he knew it was true. The Carl Friedman who believed in Hitler's vision was dead. In his place was someone new, someone confused and uncertain, and searching for new truths to replace the old lies. He walked away from the crowd, found a quiet spot behind the barracks, sat on the ground, put his head in his hands. Otto found him, sat beside him, said nothing for a long time. Finally, Carl spoke. "We lost. The war is not over." "No, we lost before it started. We just did not know." The next morning, Carl Friedman walked to Captain Sullivan's office. His decision had been made in the darkness after the barbecue, sitting behind the barracks with Otto, both of them understanding that something irreversible had occurred. He knocked. A voice called out in English. Carl entered. Sullivan looked up from his desk, surprised. The young German prisoner stood in the doorway, nervous but determined. "Sir," Carl said in halting English, "I request permission to write letter home." Sullivan leaned back in his chair. "You are allowed one letter per month. Geneva Convention. You do not need my permission." Carl shook his head. "Not that kind of letter, sir. I want to tell truth. About here, about America, about—" He searched for the word, "the lies. Will censors allow—" Something flickered in Sullivan's eyes. Understanding, perhaps even satisfaction. "What truth do you want to tell?" Carl struggled with English, switched to German. The interpreter, always present in Sullivan's office, translated. "That we were lied to. That Americans treat us better than the Wehrmacht ever did. That I am ashamed. That I believed propaganda. That—" Carl's voice cracked. "That I am sorry." Sullivan studied the young man before him. 19 years old. A child, really. A child broken not by cruelty but by kindness. A child becoming a man through the simple experience of being treated like a human being. "Write it," Sullivan said. "I will personally review. If it is honest, it goes through." Carl nodded. "Thank you, sir." He returned to the barracks, found paper and pencil provided by the camp, sat on his bunk, stared at the blank page. How do you write this letter? How do you tell your mother that everything she raised you to believe was false? How do you confess that you fought for evil, thinking it was good? He began to write. The German words flowed, not easily but necessarily. He wrote about the bacon, the eggs, the coffee. He wrote about Martha Johnson's cookies and Earl's salve for his bleeding hands. He wrote about the 4th of July barbecue, about brisket and ribs, and the impossible abundance. He wrote about shame. He wrote that Americans were not the enemy, that democracy was not weakness, that kindness was not softness, that everything Goebbels said was lies, all of it, every word. He wrote that when he came home, if he came home, he would tell everyone. He would speak truth, even if it was dangerous, even if it cost him everything. He wrote that he loved her, that he was sorry, that he hoped she could forgive him. The letter took 3 hours to write. When he finished, his hand ached and his eyes burned with unshed tears. He sealed the envelope, addressed it to Munich, gave it to Sullivan the next morning. Sullivan read it in front of Carl. His expression remained neutral. When he finished, he pulled out his stamp, pressed it to the envelope, approved. "This will take months to reach Germany," Sullivan said through the interpreter. "Maybe longer. Mail routes are disrupted by the war." "I understand, sir. Your mother will be questioned by authorities when she receives this." "I know, sir. She could be in danger." Carl met Sullivan's eyes. "She would want the truth, sir, even if it is dangerous." Sullivan nodded slowly. He placed the letter in the outgoing mail pile. That letter would travel 4,000 miles, through sensors and sorting facilities and across submarine-infested waters. It would reach Munich in late August. Gestapo would open it first. They would question Carl's mother. They would warn her about having a traitor son. She would tell them she was proud. But Carl would not learn this for 6 months. In the meantime, life at Camp Hearn continued its strange, transformative routine. The weeks became months. Summer heat gave way to slightly less oppressive heat. Cotton picking continued. Carl's hands toughened, developed calluses, stopped bleeding. He learned the rhythm of the work. Pull, drop, move. Pull, drop, move. His relationship with the Johnsons deepened in ways that surprised everyone, perhaps especially himself. One day in September, Earl asked Carl to help with a tractor repair. They worked together in the barn, Earl pointing to parts, Carl handing tools, both communicating more through gesture than words. When the repair was finished, Earl wiped his hands on a rag and looked at Carl. "You are a good worker," he said. Carl's English had improved enough to understand. Thank you, sir. You know tractors? No, sir, but I can learn. And then, Earl nodded. Something unspoken passed between them. Recognition of potential, of possibility. After the war, Earl said slowly, clearly, you will need work. Carl did not know how to respond. I'm old, Earl continued. No sons. Farm needs young man, good worker. He paused. You want job. After war, you come back. Carl stared. This man, this former enemy, this American was offering him a future. A place, a home. Carl struggled. I must go home first. Find family. Germany will be broken, Earl finished. I know. I saw it after the last war. But when you are ready, if you want, job is here. Carl's throat tightened. Why, sir? Earl considered the question. Because you are good man. I can see it. War made you soldier. But inside you are good man. Good men are hard to find. Good workers even harder. He extended his hand. Carl took it. They shook. A contract sealed not with papers, but with calloused palms and mutual respect. That night, Carl could not sleep. The job offer ran through his mind on endless repeat. Earl Johnson, who had fought against Germany in the First War, offering employment to a German soldier. Martha Johnson, baking cookies for prisoners. America feeding enemies and treating them with dignity. This was not the world Goebbels described. This was something else entirely. In October, Martha invited Carl into the farmhouse. Supervised, of course. A guard waited on the porch. But still, inside an American home. The first time Carl had been in a civilian house since capture. The interior was clean, modest, comfortable. Electric lights, running water, a radio on a shelf, photographs on the walls. Earl and Martha on their wedding day. Earl in a World War I uniform, young and serious. Martha made coffee, real coffee better even than camp coffee. She served it with shortbread cookies. They sat at the kitchen table. Martha asked questions through the guard who translated. Where was Carl from? Did he have family? What did his mother do? Carl answered. Munich. Yes, mother and two brothers. She worked in a factory. Martha's expression softened. A mother should not have to send her boys to war. Carl agreed. No, ma'am. But mothers do not choose. Governments choose. Mothers just pray. Something in Carl broke open. This woman understood. She understood the powerlessness, the fear, the love that transcends politics and borders. My mother prays for me, he said quietly. I pray for her also. Martha reached across the table and patted his hand. Just I once, a brief touch, but it conveyed everything. Compassion, understanding, shared humanity. When Carl returned to camp that evening, he felt something he had not felt in years, hope. Not for victory or glory or conquest, but for simple human connection, for the possibility that the world could be kind. In December, the letter from his mother arrived. Carl's hands shook as he opened it. 6 months since he had written, 6 months of wondering, worrying. Her handwriting, familiar and precious, covered the page. He read. She told him about the Gestapo visit, about their questions and warnings, about her response, about her pride in his honesty. She told him about the bombs. Weekly now, Munich was being destroyed piece by piece. Their building had been hit, but remained partially standing. They lived in the ground floor apartment. It was cold. There was little food. She told him about his brothers. Peter, 17, had been sent to the Eastern Front. Franz, 15, would be conscripted soon. Boys, children, sent to die for a regime that was collapsing. She told him to stay in America, to survive, to live. That Germany would need men like him when the war ended. Men who had learned from America. Men who understood there was a better way. She told him she loved him, that she forgave him, that there was nothing to forgive. The letter ended with a prayer. For his safety, for his future, for his soul. Carl read it 3 times, then he folded it carefully and placed it in his locker. His brothers were at war. Peter on the Eastern Front, where millions were dying in the frozen hell of Russia. Franz soon to follow. While Carl was safe, in Texas, eating bacon and picking cotton and saving 80 cents per day. The guilt was crushing. He found Captain Sullivan the next day. Sir, I want to help. Sullivan looked up from his paperwork. You already help. You work the farms. No, sir. I mean help the war effort. I know German tactics, procedures. I can interrogate new prisoners, translate documents, something useful. Sullivan set down his pen. That would be cooperation with the enemy. Some would call it treason. Carl met his gaze steadily. Some would call it being on the right side. Finally, a long silence. Sullivan studied this young German who had transformed so completely. From Nazi believer to American sympathizer in 6 months. The re-education program working exactly as intended. I will make inquiries, Sullivan said. No promises. Thank you, sir. Within 2 weeks, Carl had a new assignment. Half days picking cotton, half days at camp headquarters, assisting with interrogations and translation. His German military knowledge proved valuable. His willingness to explain Wehrmacht procedures, tactics, mindsets, helped American intelligence officers understand their enemy better. Some prisoners called him traitor. Hans Weber spat at him once. Carl did not care. His brothers were dying for a lie. If he could help end the war faster, save even a few lives, German or American, it was worth any accusation. He wrote propaganda leaflets, messages to be dropped over German lines, telling soldiers that surrender to Americans meant safety, food dignity, that POW camps in America were better than Wehrmacht barracks. He signed them with his name. Carl Friedman, a fellow soldier, in Texas. 45,000 copies were printed and dropped over France in the spring of 1944. How many German soldiers read them? How many believed? How many surrendered because of them? Carl would never know. But 3 decades later, he would meet a man in Munich who told him, I read your leaflet. I surrendered 2 days later. You saved my life. The war ground on. 1944 became 1945. News filtered into camp. D-Day, Paris liberated, Germany retreating on all fronts. The end was coming. Carl felt no joy, only sadness. Germany was being destroyed. His country, his home. The place where his mother and brothers lived, if they still lived. In May 1945, Germany surrendered. V-E-Day, victory in Europe. The American Guards celebrated. Prisoners sat in silent shock. It was over. They had lost. Everything they fought for, died for, believed in. Lost. Carl felt nothing. He had known for 2 years that Germany would lose. Should lose. Deserve to lose. But knowing and experiencing are different things. What now? What happened to 5,000 German prisoners in Texas now that the war was over? Nothing happened. Not immediately. The logistics of repatriating 400,000 prisoners across an ocean took time. Months. Maybe years. Carl continued working, continued learning English, continued waiting. The Johnsons asked if he could work full-time now. The war was over. Labor was scarce. They needed help. Carl agreed. He spent his days on the farm, learning, working, saving his 80 cents, building a small savings that grew slowly but steadily. In March 1946, finally his group was selected for repatriation. The last day at Camp Hearn felt surreal. This place that had been prison was now familiar. Almost comfortable. He knew every building, every path, every face. Captain Sullivan found him. They shook hands. You became a good man, Carl. I always was, sir. You just showed me how. Sullivan smiled. What will you do in Germany? Find family, rebuild, tell everyone about Texas. Come back someday. I will try, sir. Thank you. For everything. For bacon. They both laughed. Sullivan clapped him on the shoulder and walked away. The last visit to the Johnson farm was harder. Martha hugged him, the first real hug, not just a touch. You take care here. Earl handed him an envelope. Do not open until you are on the ship. Carl nodded, too emotional to speak. He climbed into the truck, looked back once. Earl and Martha stood in their yard waving. He waved back. Then the truck pulled away and they were gone. The ship to Europe was crowded with repatriated prisoners. Men going home to uncertainty, to destruction, to whatever remained of their lives. Carl opened Earl's envelope on the third day at sea. Inside, a check for $500, a fortune. More money than Carl had ever seen. And a note in Earl's careful handwriting. Use this for whatever you need. Food, clothes, new start. Job's still open if you want it. If you stay in Germany, that is fine too. They need good men. Either way, you are welcome here. Karl sat on the deck and cried. The ship landed in Hamburg in April 1946. Karl stepped onto German soil for the first time in 3 years. The devastation was beyond description. Entire cities reduced to rubble. Buildings collapsed. Streets cratered. Refugees everywhere. Orphans, amputees. The walking wounded of a nation that had destroyed itself. This was what he had fought for. This was Hitler's legacy. Kitchen rubble and broken people. The journey to Munich took days. Trains barely ran. Roads were damaged. He walked much of the way. Hitched rides when possible. When he finally reached his neighborhood, he almost could not recognize it. Whole blocks were gone. His apartment building was partially collapsed, but the ground floor miraculously remained standing. He climbed over rubble, knocked on the door he had known since childhood. His mother opened it. For a moment, neither moved. Then she pulled him inside and they held each other and cried. Peter was alive, home, missing his left leg below the knee, lost at Stalingrad, captured by Soviets, somehow survived and returned. Franz was alive, captured by Americans in the final weeks, repatriated just a month earlier. The family had survived, barely. That night in the cold apartment with its broken windows and damaged walls, they shared a dinner of watery soup and stale bread. Karl told them about Texas, about breakfast, about the Johnsons, about barbecue and baseball and kindness. His mother cried, "You were so lucky, my son." Peter, bitter in one leg, spoke harshly. "The Americans did this, bombed our cities." "No," Karl said quietly. "Hitler did this. Americans just finished what he started." An argument erupted. Franz intervened. "Enough. The war is over. We survived. That matters." But Karl knew Peter's anger would take years to heal. Some wounds go deeper than missing limbs. Over the following years, Karl worked reconstruction, clearing rubble, rebuilding buildings. Slowly, painfully, Germany began to heal. In 1948, the Marshall Plan arrived. American aid, billions of dollars, food materials, machinery, help from the nation that had bombed them, now helping them rebuild. Karl helped coordinate distribution in Munich. He told everyone who would listen, "This is America. This is who they are. They defeated us, now they help us. Learn from this." Some listened, some did not. But slowly, gradually, democracy took root in West Germany. Karl used Earl's $500 to start a small business, import and export, American goods to Germany, German goods to America, building bridges where bombs had once fallen. By 1950, he was successful. By 1955, he was prosperous. He married, had children, built a life. But he never forgot Texas, never forgot bacon and kindness, never forgot that he had been saved not by weapons, but by breakfast. In 1973, an invitation arrived, International Conference in San Antonio, German-American post-war relations. Would he attend? Karl was 49 now, successful businessman, respected member of German-American Friendship Society, father of two, grandfather of one. He accepted. The conference was boring, speeches and panels and diplomatic pleasantries. But on the second day during a break, Karl saw a name tag that made his heart stop. James Sullivan, Captain U.S. Army, retired. Karl approached. The man was older, grayer, but unmistakably Sullivan. "Bacon for breakfast," Karl said. Sullivan turned, stared. Recognition dawned. Karl Friedman. They embraced. Two old men who had been young together in very different circumstances. They talked for hours, catching up on decades. Sullivan had retired in 1960, written a memoir about Camp Hearn, consulted on POW policy, lived quietly in Dallas. Karl told his story, business success, family, life rebuilt. "Did you know," Karl said, "that your program changed thousands of lives?" Sullivan shook his head. "I hoped, did not know." "I met 47 other Camp Hearn prisoners over the years. All said the same. Texas taught us America is not the enemy. Many became democracy activists. Some immigrated to America." "That was the point," Sullivan said quietly. "Re-education through kindness." The next day, Sullivan drove Karl to Hearn. The camp had closed in 1946. The site was farmland now. A few buildings remained as historical markers. They walked the old grounds together. Carl pointed. That was the mess hall where I first ate bacon. You still remember. I will never forget. It changed my life. Sullivan was quiet. Then, good food does that. Carl stopped walking, turned to face Sullivan. Not food, kindness. You did not have to feed us well. Geneva minimum was enough. But you chose generosity. That choice saved lives. Maybe saved Germany. How? Because men like me went home and said Americans are not devils. They are good people. We can trust them. That trust helped the Marshall Plan work, helped democracy take root. Germany today is free because Americans like you showed us freedom is not weakness. Sullivan looked away emotional. I just fed you breakfast, Carl. No, sir. You fed me hope. They stood together in silence. Two old men, former enemies, now friends, standing on ground where transformation had occurred through the simple revolutionary act of treating prisoners like human beings. Years later in the 1990s, Carl would be interviewed for a documentary about POW camps. He would tell the whole story, the bacon, the barbecue, the Johnsons, the choice between hatred and kindness. He would say, I was 19 when I arrived in Texas, a Nazi, a true believer. I hated Americans. 6 months later, I loved them. Not because they imprisoned me, not because they defeated us, but because they treated me like a human being when they did not have to. He would say that breakfast was more than food. It was a statement. It said we are strong enough to be kind. We are wealthy enough to share. We are confident enough to treat enemies with dignity. And that message won the peace, not just the war. He would say, when I went home, I did not tell stories of American cruelty. I told stories of American generosity. I told 10,000 Germans they are not our enemies. They are our teachers. And Germany listened. We rebuilt. We became democracy. We became allies. All because of bacon. Carl Friedman died in 2004 at age 80, successful businessman, father of 3, grandfather of 7, a man who had been broken by kindness and rebuilt by hope. At his funeral, his children found among his belongings a tin of salve decades old and dried out, a photograph of Earl and Martha Johnson, a yellowed letter from his mother, and a framed menu from July 4th, 1943, Camp Hearn, Texas. The menu listed brisket ribs, corn coleslaw, potato salad, watermelon, and peach cobbler. In Carl's handwriting at the bottom a note, the day I stopped being a Nazi and started being free. This is what remains, not monuments or battlefields or great speeches, but small moments of human kindness that ripple forward through time. Breakfast that becomes transformation. Cookies that become hope. Dignity extended to enemies that becomes peace. America did not win World War II only with bombs and guns. America won with values, with generosity, with the belief that even enemies deserve to be treated like human beings. That is the America Carl Friedman discovered in Texas in 1943. That is the America we must remember. That is the America worth preserving. Because in the end, the most powerful weapon is not a bomb or a bullet. It is a plate of bacon and eggs. It is a cookie offered with a smile. It is the choice to be kind when you could be cruel. That choice changes everything. That choice changed Carl. That choice can change the world.